Hello, and very many thanks for joining us on the program People, Politics and Power. I am Imonia Marere. The African Union, AU, will this weekend hold its 38th Annual Summit of Heads of State and Governments at its headquarters in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. This year's summit is focused on justice for Africans and people of African descent through reparations. The 2025 summit will, however, be taking place under the shadows of conflicts, wars, and deadly violence raging in some parts of the continent. The latest is the ongoing conflict in the Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo, DRC, between the Democratic Republic of Congo government and a Rwandan-backed rebel group known as M23. Now, as at the last count, about 3,000 lives have been lost in that conflict. And there is also the almost 2-year-old war in the Sudan, which has consumed thousands of lives and displaced millions of people internally and externally. In both cases, the African Union has displayed pitiable helplessness, either in mediating or resolving the crisis, and these are not isolated cases. There are other unresolved conflicts in the Sahel region, violent extremism in Central and Southern Africa, and the civil war that is still ongoing in Somalia. Africa's dream of unity, peace, and prosperity, which is the guiding vision of the AU, was founded on the promise of a proactive approach to resolving conflicts and ensuring stability across the continent. Despite these bold aspirations, Africa remains plagued by deadly conflicts. The AU is said to be hamstrung by internal divisions, limited resources, the competing interests of member states, and the influence of external actors. Yet, it has Peace and Security Commission and an African standby force. The question is, what has happened to the AU's homegrown conflict resolution mechanisms? How can Africa seek reparatory justice with a divided house and on a bended knee? These are the issues that we will be trying to look at as we look forward to the 38th Summit of the African Union in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. And I'm joined in the studio, right here in the studio, by Dr. Lekon Babatunde. Dr. Babatunde is of the Peace and Conflict Resolution, that's the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. He's in fact the head of the Directorate of External Conflict Prevention and Resolution of the Institute. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you for having me.
We are also joined virtually by Ambassador Joe Keshi. Ambassador Joe Keshi is the former permanent secretary in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria, a former Nigerian envoy to Ethiopia, Namibia, Sierra Leone, Belgium, Netherlands, and the United States. Ambassador Keshi was in fact part of those who negotiated and resolved the crisis that happened in Sierra Leone at the time he was an envoy to that country. Ambassador Keshi, thank you so much for finding time to join us. He will be joining us in a while. All right, so let's begin this way. Dr. Lekon, the AU is meeting. It's the usual yearly summit of heads of state and government. And this is the 38th edition. The theme for this year is simply reparatory justice for Africans and persons of African descent. First, I'd like to know what your thoughts are on that theme.
Yeah, once again, thank you for having me. And I would say, first of all, that it is, on point for the AU, African Union Commission, to address the theme which they set at last year in Maju on the justice for Africans and of African descent through reparation. And that is social justice because of these social injustices we have seen all over. So this 38th AU summit is of good essence, is of very important, and is valid at this moment. Africa is undergoing, confronting the conflict that we're seeing, that we're witnessing, like you have mentioned in your opening, in the DRC Congo, in Sudan, in the Great Sahel, in Mozambique, and all, even in Ethiopia and Somalia. So for this team, it's apt and it's relevant and it's valid for for this point that African Union is trying to transition, onto the present, political, geopolitical, competition and geopolitical realities, as we're having the geopolitical players, trying to, to undermine, to exploit African resources and so on and so forth. So it is very, very important that this team is apt for us, and it aligns with Nigeria's foreign policy doctrine that of the 4Ds. This is very, very important for us in the country, in the region, in ECOWAS, and other community regional blocks in Africa.
The thinking of some foreign policy analysts and people who are actually very concerned about the situation on the continent today is that there is a thinking that the AU should be more focused at this summit on the issues that are actually at hand. And those issues that are at hand is economic survival, is the survival of the peoples on the continent, political and social integration, and not reparations.
Yes, yeah, thank you very much. Their thinking is valid. It's also relevant that the prevailing socio-economic conditions and political conditions in Africa are really, fueling, this conflict. But let us look at it that the theme reparation, is about addressing the historical injustices. It's about addressing, social, injustices of the violence against people. And these injustices are some of the factors that are driving the present day, challenges, security challenges we're having. If they are not addressed, definitely there could be it's very difficult to achieve regional and continental goals and objectives in order to, to promote food security, in order to promote climate change sustainability, in order to promote peace building and security for the people. Because for the agenda, for the vision of the AU at the Agenda 2063, that envisions that Africa will be placed in the future among, as a potential, global workforce, because of this steaming youth. If these injustices are not addressed at this very important time, it will be very difficult for all these developmental goals of each regional blocks, economic blocks, either in the ECOWAS, either in SADC, either in the East Africa communities, in Central African communities, and so on and so forth. But because there have been some of these challenges that are mitigating against all these development challenges are those atrocities, those violence, those crimes that have been committed in long past, and they are intricately linked to the challenges we're having at this moment in the country, in the continent. Different groups are having all these challenges of injustice. Oh, we have had mass raping, we have killings, kidnapping, genocide. All these atrocities, if they are not addressed, either they are committed by individuals, by groups or institutions, either within the African continent, we have seen in South Africa, we have seen in Rwanda, either they are committed by the colonialists, through slavery, through colonialism, and so on and so forth. All these factors, culminated in all the challenges we're having in order not to, achieve our development goals and objectives. So for us to achieve the democratic norms, for us to promote rule of law, for us to promote all these to address climate change challenges, to put food on the table of an ordinary man, because it's about the ECOWAS of the, I mean, each is about the African Union is about the people, because it's a union of the people. So for all them to put the food on the table and to achieve the Agenda 2063, it is very, very important that past injustices, the historical social injustices, crimes have to be addressed. And this comes at a very important time in this moment, because Africa is not standing alone in this regard. We have seen that going on in Canada, the Canadian Japanese. We have seen it in Australia against the Aborigines. We have seen it in other places. Like what is going on too, in the Middle East, what is going on too in Syria, and so on and so forth. Africa is not in isolation. That for us to really move on to the future, for us to achieve what we have set, then definitely we have to look back, because the present generations are not the perpetrators of all these crimes. We are responsible for this present, and we are responsible to set the future for ourselves. So the past, that people that have committed all these atrocities, they have gone. Many of them have gone, and they needed to be addressed, because they are the underpinning, factors driving, fueling, escalating all these insecurity, violence, and challenges we're having.
So addressing these historical issues, these historical differences and crimes that you talk about, the expectation is that the AU as a body, which emerged from the OAU,
yes,
would be more proactive, or should have been more proactive in dealing with them. But instead, what we see is a situation where the AU continues to be a talk shop, where heads of government, heads of state gather every year, February of every year, and say the same things, the same rhetorics from the previous year, from the previous 2 years, from the previous 10 years. They keep on carrying it on. And there doesn't seem to be any definite and proactive measure to address the issues that we talk about here. Today we are faced with the numerous conflicts on the continent. The AU is unable, or rather it appears helpless in dealing with those conflicts. And here we're talking about reparations. The reparation question has been on the table for as long as I can remember. You recall that at a point, the late Chief Moshood Abiola championed the whole question of reparations for Africa. Then in 2025, the AU is reviving that when it's faced with an existential question. That's my point. I mean, that's the
thank you
question.
very much. By virtue of that question, let me say, that I'm a historian. By virtue of my studies, by virtue of my research, I would say that it is very, very important that we look back. History is very, very important to guide the present and to project into the future. Many of the challenges people, communities, people groups, even in Nigeria, in West Africa, and the wider continent, are suffering from are as a result of the past atrocities. And we can't continue to move forward if these atrocities, crimes, are not well addressed, so that there will be justice, there will be compensation to individuals. We have seen areas where all these social reparation, restorative justice have achieved a lot. It has done a lot in South Africa. It has done a lot in Brazil, in Chile. It has done. So for AU to come now to say, oh, last year by the time they set this team, I'm sure that the DRC conflict has not degenerated to this level. The Sudan conflict, we are seeing the civil war in Sudan between the RSF and the military, have not been generated.
That Sudanese war is 2 years old.
It's 2 years old, but it has not been done. That there is need, because to appease the people, to appease the populace, it is very, very important to address. And I think that also aligns with Nigeria's foreign policy, being that when you mentioned the example of MKO, Chief MKO Abiola, or repatriation campaign, Perhaps, probably that was one of the reasons why it was not, he lost that, the election was annulled. We don't know. But I'm saying that it was Hope 93, and this present government is renewed hope. And I'm sure this government of renewed hope, aligns with that AAU team of repatriation to have justice for Africans, not Africans in the continent alone, but Africa of people of African descent. That there is need to address the violations against their rights. When I am pissed by what you have done against me in the past, we will have reconciliation. We have forgiveness. There will be love. We'll be able to move forward in all this well. Without addressing all this conflict, it will be very difficult, like I've said, to move, to achieve, our desired goal. And AU doing it at this point in time, when OAU was in existence, before in 2001 it changed, transformed into AU. Then there were cross-border conflict, in the continent. But later, conflict transformed into being instability within country. And each country, because to avoid the snowballing, the crossover of all this violence, it is important, for AU to look at, every year is important. Every year, each team is, is conceived and released because of the prevailing, need to address what was the utmost importance. That we have our programs, we have our objectives, and we have, Peace and Security Council to address all this. So it is important that for the AU, I'm in support of that team, that it is not about talk show, because you believe that dialogue is very important. Whatever we want to resolve, whatever we want to prevent, whatever we want to manage, we must first of all begin by talking. So the talking position is this. I think it's about implementation, really, challenges. Talking is not the main challenge, it's not the problem, but it's about implementation, which is very, very important for that we need at this moment to make sure that whatever we plan, are transformed, are pursued onto fruition, to success.
All right, let's take a short break and hope that we're able to bring in Ambassador Joe Keshi into the discussion.
Germane to Nigeria's democratic process.
Politicians can only be seen maybe on television by judges. They should not intermingle, because once you intermingle, then you destroy the systems.
When the personalities are big, important to national discourse.
When you reach certain stage in power and you demonstrate arrogance to the extreme, there's no other thing that will happen to you other than to fall.
When the developments are seemingly complex, confounding like a 1,000-piece jigsaw, that's when we require bold, sound, and analytical minds to help put the pieces together. Jigsaw with Benga Arileba, now showing Tuesdays and Thursdays at 1 p.m. on AIT. Jigsaw, demystifying the issues.
Thank you so much for staying with us. We're looking at the 38th Summit of the African Union, which is holding in Addis Ababa, Ethiopian capital. And of course, my guest in the studio is Dr. Lekon Babatunde. He is the head of the Directorate of External Conflict Prevention and Resolution at the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution here in the nation's capital, Abuja. Thank you so much. We hope that we are able to reconnect with Ambassador Joe Keshi, former Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Nigeria, and was also at one time Nigeria's ambassador to Ethiopia, Namibia, Sierra Leone, Belgium, Netherlands, and the United States. So let's look at the whole question of Agenda 2063 put out by the African Union. The objective is to create a union of African peoples. This is 2025. It's just some 20, 25 light years away. How well is that going?
At this moment in time, On the continental basis, we would say that the journey is slow, but it's still formidable in terms of the goals are there, the implementation structures are there, as far as but the main challenge is just the violence, the instability, and coupled with the new reality. For example, now for the development aids that are being suspended by the United States, the new government, also because many of these, much of this support are coming from the U.S. support through the United States of America, which to achieve some, development and humanitarian, goals. But the way the African Union is going is slow, but we can as well do more to achieve all this, to put food on the ordinary table of an African, ordinary African. So as far as the people are concerned, they don't want to know what is happening in Addis Ababa, for example, but they want to see that their immediate government is achieving, their secured environment, because the AU says peaceful and secure continent Africa is what we are looking for. So, and through the agendas 2063 and through the framework of African peace and security architecture, in which there is the framework to build, to promote, the framework to promote peace and the framework to promote security and to promote stability in the country, then definitely this will translate into others, because in the midst of violence, there'll be no achievement of other areas. There'll be no development. There'll be no growth. The economy too will not be growing. But in the after, for example, the different frameworks they've set up in the Africa Free Trade, continental free trade area, this is the Africans are also interacting. There's this inter-Africa trade, activities among the continent. Then we're having the visa-free movement in the continent too. That many countries in Africa now are now embracing the free visa movement. When we see all this, then definitely there'll be, people are having, confidence in what their continental body is doing, the AU is doing, but they can still do more. But what we're saying is that from where I started, that it is slow, but it's growing formidable. But now is the time for Africa to re-strategize. This Saturday and Sunday, when these meetings, takes place, it is important for the heads of state and government to look at all these realities, to be able to say, oh, we have been having, a lot of conflict. We have been having violence. Why? And the reality of, international order in Africa, in terms of aid support, in terms of, a multilateral, relationship. So it is important for them to realize, to be able to, to realize and come together and be able to achieve all these goals for the next, till February again, so that we'll see that in the next 12 months, a lot has been achieved coherently and, in long term.
If we look back, the last 1 year, between February 2024 and February 2025, what would you say in tangible terms that the AU actually achieved? Yes,
for the past 1 year, I've been having engagement with the Peace and Security Council Secretariat in Addis Ababa, and they visited our office too. We have a kind of bilateral engagement dialogue on this. And in terms of, we may not, for ordinary an African, one will not be able to see what they are doing, but they are working. As far as the PSC is concerned, they are working underneath. In all these 5 economic communities we have in ECOWAS, in SADC, in East, etc., and in North Africa, the AU the PSC is connecting, is contacting, with them in the political transition. They are involved. So between last year and this, we have seen some elections taking place, and we have seen successfully how the elections are. In Gambia, in Senegal, we have seen peaceful resolution. We see the role Nigeria played. We see the role ECOWAS played. And Nigeria is the chairperson of Africa ECOWAS Commission, in our president, Bola Ahmed Tinubu. So these are what they are doing. And each regional bloc is not operating in isolation. They operate with the AU. So the fault is not in the AU. For ordinary person, for ordinary Africa, for outsider, it was safe the African Union is not doing. But African Union is collaborating, is connecting dialogue. There is this strategic connection between them in terms of programming, in terms of intervention, in terms of... So many conflicts have been resolved. We have the panel of the wise. Former President Goodluck Jonathan has been moving from one end to the other. President Olusegun Obasanjo too has also been doing that. Also from Southern Africa and every other thing. So between last year and this, a lot too has been happening. That some conflicts that are supposed to have snowballed into violence, they have been, resolved peacefully, and also many other things. So in terms of elections, in terms of rule of law, in terms of justice, in terms of engagement with outside the world, with China, with India, with Turkey, we have seen that the President Erdogan of Turkey also helped, mediated in the conflict between Ethiopia and Tanzania over the Somalia and over Somaliland, because of the access to the coast by Ethiopia and the development of Egypt. All these conflicts, some of these conflicts have been resolved. So a lot has been done, even since January 2025.
Right. What exactly is happening to the African or the AU standby force? Because that was the force that was aimed at helping to also mitigate crisis, conflicts, violence on the continent, stepping as the case may be.
Yes.
And then resolve some of the... But the African standby force appears to be dead on arrival.
Yes, since early 2000, 2001 or 2004, that was, 2004, about 21 years now that the standby force has been in existence. We can say as designed, as conceptualized, it has not really delivered on that, goals, on that strategic mandate.
Okay,
But
Mr. Babatunde, I will have to stop you there a bit so that we can bring in Ambassador Joe Keshi now. Ambassador, thank you so much for joining us at this time. I'm sure that you've been following our discussions. 38th Summit of the African Union. Of course, the focus is on reparatory justice at a time when the continent is actually faced with a number of conflicts, violence, and crises. And I'm wondering, as an individual, why the AU is focused on reparatory justice at this point in time, rather than trying to resolve the many conflicts in different parts of the continent. Can you hear me, Ambassador? Ambassador, you need to unmute so that we can hear you at this end. We'll try and rectify that and get back to you very quickly.
So the African Standby Force has not been deployed to any country since its inception. But they are doing two things. The force is doing two things. First of all, each of the five regional regions is expected to has a brigade, and these brigades are to deploy rapidly, when it comes to deployment. But that has never been done. But what I understand that through ECOWAS, this standby force, through the the PSC Council, the Peace and Security Council, has helped in the Banjul, the transition in the Banjul in 2017. It has also been deployed through regional, in South Africa, inside the Southern SADC in Lesotho too. So these are what it has been. And the problem is the way this force was conceptualized, that each country of Africa, we have to draft contingent, to draft troops for rapid deployment, which many nations feel that, if there is no conflict within my border, then this has been affected. So this has a problem of its own. So that is why, then in terms of logistics, this is giving the AU the kind of challenges, which I think that needs to be addressed.
Your explanation is that it has really not taken off the way it ought to have taken off. And that leads me to the next question, which is the conflict, the ongoing conflict in the DR Congo. There was about 2 or 3 days ceasefire, but all of that is gone now because the violence has resumed. Many people have been displaced. In fact, millions of people have been displaced in the eastern DR Congo. There are accusations that Rwanda, who is a member of the AU, is the one backing the M23 rebels. And the question is, why is the AU unable to call any of its members to order? Why is the AU unable to step in and ensure that this conflict is brought to a halt, given the enormous suffering that the people of that region are going through?
It is quite unfortunate that the war in DRC Congo has been a protracted one, like you have alluded to, and it has really exacerbated humanitarian disasters. Many people have died, women have been raped, people have been displaced, and people have been suffering, people have been killed, minerals exploited, and this has been followed and for a very long time. And I think it is important at this moment in time, like the effort being taken by the SADC and the Central Africa Economic Community. They met last week in Tanzania, and efforts are ongoing. And this, they have to report. From my contact with Addis Ababa, I understand that they are reporting to the council over the crisis and the role that the AU will play in trying to mitigate. I'm sure that after this crisis, we will see some dialogue. Some dialogue.
Do you see an end to this crisis at all? Do you see an end? Because the way it is going, it doesn't appear as if the M23 rebel group is ready for any form of dialogue. They have not only attacked civilians, they have also attacked the UN peacekeeping force in that region.
For us to see an end to that conflict, then definitely there will be political strategies, political mediations that will involve President Tshisekedi, that will also involve the political oppositions in Kinshasa with Rwanda, with President Paul Kagame, and also all those people that have, the players that have interest. But don't let us also forget, it's not happening in isolation. There are multi-stakeholders, that have interest, geopolitical players also having interest from Europe, from Asia, from the Middle East, that also fueling conflict in that region because of the enormity of the mineral resources in DRC Congo. Don't forget, DRC Congo borders about 8-9 countries border DRC Congo, and it's a very large country. So, and different minerals have been obtained from that place. Is it from their colonial past, from Belgium, from France, and so on and so forth, from UAE, from Britain, from the Americans. So all these parties will have to align. The AU, I agree with you that a lot has to be done by AU. A lot of political strategies have to take, to be played, between all the stakeholders, because it is very, very important. People are suffering. Human losses, humanitarians, at this very moment of, challenges to secure aids. So it is important that AU put a conclusion, at least let us have some cessation of, to the conflict.
But does it have the political will to do just that?
I think
because it doesn't appear as if the AU is able to call the parties in this conflict to order.
Yes, I agree with you that all stakeholders, including Nigeria, are calling on the political, they are putting pressure this time around, that from the feelers I've got, that AU has to do something. They have to call people to the round table, since like we have seen some indications now, Russia and Ukraine are likely to have, some respite from what we have been having for the past 24 hours from President Trump with his, phone call with President Putin of Russia. So when we have, some cessation of conflict from that side to a promise, kind of. So we can also have some promise within here, but it is a very difficult challenge that I think all the, the political health, the diplomacy have to be taken, put into consideration. Dialogue has to take place, to also, take place to able to resolve, to preserve this conflict, if not to, permanently resolve, definitely to manage the conflict, so that there'll be no, the upscaling of hostilities.
Has diplomacy also failed in the case of the Sudan, which has been at war with itself for 2 long years?
A lot of diplomacy, diplomatic moves were made within Africa and outside Africa over Sudan, civil wars. The parties, there was a time the president and everyone were invited to Saudi Arabia, they were invited to Libya, they were invited to Egypt, and so on and so forth. And these are under the auspices of AU. And I'm sure that this time has come, I will agree that since it is still ongoing, that the war has not received the kind of diplomacy that we, try to, that we expected. But I'm sure that with this meeting over this weekend, there will be some serious talking among political, stakeholders, among diplomats, among, foreign agencies, among international organizations, because United Nations too will be at the meeting. The development organizations too will be at the meetings, and individuals, the private sectors, people from the private sectors too will be at the summit too. That all these conflicts that we are having, the time has come for us to do, be able to put some cessation to the hostilities, and to be able for us to be able to achieve our 2063 agenda.
What does that speak of African diplomacy? If African diplomats, African leaders are unable to resolve internal disputes, what has happened to the homegrown conflict resolution mechanisms that the AU itself put in place? What does that speak of our diplomacy as a continent?
What that says, points to me, is what we've started with in this discussion, that it is important to address the past injustices committed by foreigners, committed by people within the continent, to address the injustices, economic, political, or whatever, of injustice, the past errors, the past violence.
Who is to address them?
From at governmental level, at the whole of society level, at whole of government level, at the whole of the international friends of Africa.
But how can you expect to address those when, as a continent, as individual countries on the continent, we are still very much dependent on the so-called former colonial masters and the Western or Eastern world for a lot of aid? I mean, there is, on the average, many of the African countries that are independent today are as old as 30 years in terms of political independence. Yet they are still very much dependent on aid. So how do you expect to resolve those historical injustices when none of the African countries on the continent is able to stand on its own?
Yeah, it is quite unfortunate anyway that we are having this kind of conflicts after about more than 60 years of political independence. But it is of the interest of our geopolitical powers, the United States, Russia, China, to have peace, to promote peace too in Africa. The time has come that the multilateralism, they are promoting this multilateralism, for us to have, to promote peace, for Africa to have some cessation. They have their interest. That's why they are investing here. They are building bridges, they are building infrastructures, economic cooperation, investment here and there, because of the trust of the peace. Without that, they wouldn't be able to do that, because they too have to borrow money to invest in Africa. So there is kind of commitment, there is kind of confidence in Africa. But it's quite unfortunate that we are undergoing this. And I begin to see that the crop of African leaders that we have now, they're quite different from the whole, the whole that we've had. And this crop of African leaders, the President Tinubu, the Senegal, the Cote d'Ivoire, of course, you have to relate with your partners. And you can see the balance of Africa older now, that they relate with the West. They don't put all their eggs in one basket. They also go to Russia, they go to Turkey, they go to India, they go to China, and all these powers, the realities are beginning to, to dawn on them in Africa. So the present crop of African leaders, we see, they have that commitment. And that commitment can let us be able to see what will happen at the end of this, their summit. And I'm sure it will come to individuals to be able to be open, individual countries to be able to open, to be receptive to the commitment, the resolutions that will come out from the summit, to be able in terms of implementation. As far as Nigeria is concerned, Nigeria has been in the vanguard of this regional peace and
Talking
security.
about resolutions, I mean, many argue, critics of the AU argue, for instance, that the resolutions that come out of the AU summits are not what the paper on which they are written on. And that is because Africa is a divided continent with individual country interest, with regional interest, and of course, the external forces that you talk about, that you speak so much about, are there. And those interests are not the interest that will serve the purpose or the interest of Africa and Africans. It is the interest of those who are interfering in Africa. So how do you expect Africa to, for instance, seek reparatory justice when it is on its knees and with begging bowls all over the world, east, west, south, and what have you?
Let me give you some signs that I'm optimistic that we will begin to see some changes. There will be no deterioration of what we used to have in the past in terms of resolution, in terms of implementation. When we look at the past 1 year, we are reviewing in terms of the political realities in West Africa. We have seen the France that is, moving away from their colonial, colonies, their former colonies, and where they have military bases, and they are moving away. So they are relinquishing the kind of hold, the shackles in which they hold Africa. So Africa begin to have that kind of freedom.
They were actually forced out from these countries.
They are forced out, and the realities
come. They are not moving away voluntarily.
Yes.
They are not voluntarily, yes.
But the reality is all over the world. Look at Russia. Look at Afghanistan, that they are forced out. But when you are forced out, the reality is that, things are changing. Let us begin to change too. Let us go back to our shore.
But where they have been forced out,
geopolitical power.
Where they have been forced out, or in the countries where they have been forced out, they have been replaced by another colonial, a neo-colonial entity.
For a change, sometimes when the change happens, sometimes it's so bitter. But it begins positively in other areas. And I think that is what is coming now into play. When you begin to support leaders that they don't respect democratic norms, they change their constitutions for them to stay in power for life, you begin to see a sort of things that will make change possible. So these are the dynamics. We begin to see in South Africa also some promising change. That South Africa, because of the apartheid, the history, the lessons they have learned, they have begun to take, to decolonize some of their, the past, some of their doctrines, politicals, education, and so on and so forth. We have seen all this. So people have come to the realizations in Africa that for you to develop, you begin to balance relationship. You begin to balance your multilateral and bilateral relationship. And I think that is what is happening now. That when Africa, each communities, together with AU, begins to come together, begins to foster relationship. We are beginning to see promises of visa. It wasn't like that before, visa-free movement in Africa. We begin to see after to trade within us. We begin to see speed train is coming up from Angola to Tanzania to Zambia, also coming up. We have never seen such kind of rapid development. So there is a little transformation. That is why I said that it is slow, but we are coming there. We will get there, I'm sure.
Some of these infrastructural developments you talk about are actually being provided by interests outside of the continent. And that is a concern.
Of course, for any development to take place, I'm also a sinologist. I've been to China. I'm a part-time professor in China. I know what you're talking about. The Chinese government, through BRI, the Belt and Road Initiative, encouraged investors to come to Africa. This is their own area. And for them to they go to the bank, development bank, to secure loan. And when a place in Africa community has problem, to move from just 1 kilometer, that will take about 2 hours to cross from one community to another community. But with a bridge, with a road, within 30 minutes, and that will facilitate trade. It will facilitate services, goods, and so on and so forth. So bring in loan, and you are committed. I think there is MOU on all these loans, and you paid back. If you borrowed me money now, I paid back. And when you commit to it, there is no corruption, that is everything, there's accountability. Like we have said of reparation, then definitely there will be development. But these people that are providing, that brought this debt, they are not coming to dominate us politically. They are not asking us to change politically. They are not forcing us to change our constitution. They are trading, we are partners. This is very, very essence. In this part of development we have seen the ECOWAS that is coming up, ECOWAS Commission along Airport Road, being built by China. We have seen AU Commission that the meeting, where the meeting is taking place, built by donation by the Chinese people, and so on and so forth. So these are, all these, in these nuances in the system. Definitely, if Africa, this crop of Africa, that I think many of them are beginning to realize that that is important. That so some countries can leave us leave us alone and remove their aids, can suspend their aids. You too can be Africa first. Let us have this African first policy, like we also have the American first policy doctrine. And this, I think, is the time. The youth are also coming up. They are realizing that with the AI that is coming up, with people, connectivity between African youth together. And I think the future is promising.
The debt overhang on many African countries, how do you relate that to the promising future that you see for Africa? It's very huge. I mean, whether it's from the World Bank, the IMF, from the US, from Europe, or now from China and Russia, the debt overhang is huge.
You are correct.
It suggests that for as long as possible, most African countries will remain perpetually under the control of those who provide these resources.
When this agreement to take loan, for example, comes into play, began, there are government officials that signed the MOU, the agreement, contract agreement, or whatever, and they have seen what they can be committed to. So with accountability, with openness in the system, I think and believe that Africa officials, governments, corporations will be able to fulfill all this. And the mechanisms for these loans, for arbitrations of any dispute that comes out of debt can be addressed. We have the ICC in Hague, and there is this international organization for mediation that is also coming up too. But we have the Singapore agreement we all signed. These are platforms, the frameworks upon which any countries that have any disagreement, like what we have, the judgment we have in Paris, where the presidential aircraft was seized. So all those things have been in place to address. Should be able to address any conflict, any dispute over contract, over debt. So my call to African leaders is just that they should try as much as possible, whatever they are committed to, by past administration, they should be able to fulfill it in order to exacerbate any debt. But when we see that, we have a gap, we need to provide this particular development intervention in a particular area. We can seek for debt, the loan, to be able to address. But when it becomes so hard to pay, it becomes, a burden on, on that particular government, and it will be an hindrance for that government to achieve its development goals. So commitment, openness, sincerity of purpose, all these will be able to be, done, and it will not be able to get burden. One geopolitical power will not be dragging any African country. So it is very, very important.
All right. And on the final note, let me ask, what are your expectations from the 38th Summit?
My expectations overall, from what I have said so far, it is important that after the summit, the 38th Summit, we begin to see some reduction, in the hostilities. We begin to see some mediation activities taking place, to resolve the Sudan crisis, the Sudan war, the DRC, bring Tshisekedi and Paul Kagame to the table. I'm sure there'll be reduction, the resolution of that conflict to some extent. For conflicts to happen is because of the failure of dialogue. Dialogue, will be taking place. And also, there will be, a concerted effort for Africa to be united, to seek for reparation for the injustices that we have witnessed in the time past. Because this is very, very important. Not only from outside the country for foreigners, but also from within Africa. Because people are feeling embittered. People felt their rights have been violated. People have been exploited.
What strategy do you think that the AU will employ to get the results as far as reparatory justice is concerned?
As far as
this is a
pure
cause
that
has been on for decades.
Dialogue.
What is new that they are bringing to the table?
Dialogue,
with
meeting with all stakeholders, actors, victims, and perpetrators. We have seen it in South Africa, the Truth and Reconciliation the panel. We have also seen it in Nigeria during Oputa panel, that this was only that we didn't see the fruition of the report. But it is very, very important that the past injustices, like we have, we began with in this conversation, that they are addressed. So I see AU coming with strategies, using all its organs differently, to begin to play this mediation role, to begin to play peace-building role in all this. ECOSOC is there. People that in all this panel of the wise suppose also will be playing critical role. Okay. All the community will begin to see even the encouragement to the military juntas in this great, Central Sahel to begin to embrace that. There will be transition. Guinea has indicated, its intention to transit into democracy, and so on and so forth.
All right, thank you so much. Let's leave it at that and hope for the very best from the summit. Dr. Lekon Babatunde is the head of the Directorate for External Conflict Prevention and Resolution of the Institute for Peace and Conflict Resolution. Of course, we were unable to get Ambassador Joe Keshi to join us meaningfully. Ambassador Joe Keshi, former Permanent Secretary, Minister of Foreign Affairs, was Nigeria's envoy to Ethiopia, Namibia, Sierra Leone, Belgium, Netherlands, and the United States at different times. But we hope that we're able to bring him in on the program at some other time. Thank you so much for investing your time with us, and bye for now.